The mountain trail was supposed to be silent that summer morning. But halfway up Pine Hollow Forest, Jack Turner's steps froze. Ranger, his loyal German shepherd, suddenly lowered his head, ears sharp, body stiff like he'd just heard something Jack couldn't. In the hush beneath the pines, a faint sound drifted through the heat, a whisper that didn't belong to the forest. What had Ranger found in the heart of these woods? And why did it feel less like danger and more like a call for help? Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and subscribe for more stories like this. The summer heat lay low across Pine Hollow Forest, warm and dense like a woolen blanket that hadn't been washed in years. Golden shafts of sunlight filtered through the pines, catching on lazy curls of mist that had yet to lift from the forest floor. Somewhere in the distance, a mourning dove cooed softly, and the forest answered with silence. Jack Turner adjusted the straps of his hiking backpack, feeling the leather dig into his shoulders in a way that was both familiar and oddly comforting. He was 48 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of physique that hinted at a youth spent pushing his body to its limits. Years of military service had left their mark not just on his muscles, but on the way he carried himself. Steady, watchful, as if the world was always about to change on him. His hair, once a clean shade of chestnut, now carried streaks of early gray, brushed back beneath a faded olive-green cap. A short, uneven beard framed a square jawline, giving him the look of a man who rarely smiled, but had learned to listen. His eyes were a steel gray, sharp yet tired, as though every tree line reminded him of somewhere he'd been before, somewhere hot, loud, and violent. Jack had been discharged from the service nearly a decade ago, but the weight of Afghanistan never quite left him. There were nights when the whisper of wind through pine trees became the distant thud of rotor blades. Mornings when the sweat on his neck felt like desert sand. He'd come to Pine Hollow to escape all that, or at least to silence it for a few days. Hiking alone was his way of proving to himself that he could still find peace, even if it came in fragments. The trail beneath his boots was narrow and packed with pine needles, soft and almost soundless. He liked it that way. Solitude had become both armor and punishment. He stopped for a moment to wipe sweat from his brow, inhaling the sharp resin scent of the pines. The air carried the weight of summer, dry and hot but breathable. He closed his eyes, letting the quiet settle into him like water into dry earth. That was when he heard it. It was faint at first, almost too soft to notice. A weak whimper carried on the breeze. Jack froze, head tilting slightly, every instinct from his soldiering years snapping to attention. The sound came again, clearer this time, from somewhere just off the trail to his left. He scanned the undergrowth. A patch of tall ferns shivered, though the air around them was still. He hesitated. A rabbit, maybe. A fox. Or something injured. He wasn't in the mood for distractions, but something deep inside him, a muscle memory more than thought, made his boots turn toward the sound. He moved carefully, pushing past the ferns with a forearm, expecting nothing. Then he saw him. Lying partly hidden beneath a fallen pine branch was a German shepherd, big but frighteningly thin. His black and tan coat dulled with dirt and burrs. His right foreleg was scraped raw, the fur clotted with dried blood, and a faint tremor ran through his ribs as he breathed. His ears twitched weakly at Jack's approach, but his amber eyes remained sharp, alert, not panicked. Around his neck hung a worn leather collar with brass letters almost rubbed smooth, but Jack could still make them out. E.H. Jack crouched slowly, one knee sinking into the warm earth. He'd seen animals in pain before. On deployments, they'd wandered into camps from the villages, carrying stories without words. But this one was different. This dog wasn't just hurt. He was waiting. "Hey, buddy," Jack murmured, his voice instinctively dropping into that low, steady tone he used to calm soldiers in panic. "Easy now." The dog's ears perked just slightly at the sound of a human voice, and he let out a low, almost questioning huff. Jack extended a hand, palm up, letting the dog smell him first. The shepherd didn't flinch. He just watched him with those sharp, tired eyes. Jack knew that look. It was the look of someone who'd held on too long to be surprised by kindness. The old instincts took over. Jack unhooked the small emergency first aid pouch from his belt. He dampened a cloth with water from his canteen and began gently wiping the blood from the dog's leg. The shepherd winced, but didn't pull away, just pressed his muzzle against the ground and let out a slow breath. Jack cleaned the wound, then wrapped it with a strip of gauze. "You're a tough one," he said softly, tying off the bandage with practiced fingers. He poured some water into a collapsible cup and pushed it toward the dog. The shepherd hesitated, then leaned forward and began to lap it up with quiet, steady movements. Up close, Jack could see that the dog wasn't young anymore. Maybe 6, maybe 7 years old. Strong bones beneath the lean muscle, ears upright like soldiers at attention. This wasn't some stray. He'd belonged to someone, and not long ago. Jack sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on his pants. "Who the hell let you get out here alone?" The dog didn't answer, of course, but something in the way he turned his head, slowly, deliberately, made Jack follow his gaze deeper into the forest. A chill ran through him, subtle but real, even in the heat of the morning. There was nothing out there, just trees and silence. But the shepherd's body language was unmistakable. He wasn't just lost. He wanted Jack to follow. "Not today," Jack muttered, standing and brushing off his knees. "I came here to be alone." But the dog, Ranger, as Jack would later name him, took a few unsteady steps toward the trees, then stopped, glancing back at him. It wasn't pleading. It was expectation. Command. Jack stared back, lips pressed tight, a muscle working in his jaw. He didn't owe this animal anything. But there was something about that gaze, unshaken even through pain, that echoed a long-buried part of himself. He sighed. "Damn it." Jack lifted the dog carefully, one arm beneath the chest and the other under the hind legs. Ranger was heavier than he looked, all lean muscle beneath the grime. Jack carried him back to the trail where his small camp was set up. A battered canvas tent, a roll mat, and a small metal pot on a folding stove. The morning sun was climbing now, making the air shimmer faintly above the forest floor. He laid Ranger down on the cool ground in the shade and gave him another small drink of water, then tore open a packet of jerky from his pack. The shepherd ate like a soldier who'd been trained not to waste time. Quiet, efficient, no begging, no hesitation. Jack found himself watching him more closely than he'd meant to. It wasn't just the injuries or the quiet strength. It was the discipline in this animal. Someone had trained him well. Jack leaned back against a tree, exhaling long and slow. "All right, soldier," he muttered. "You win a ride." Ranger, though not officially named yet, flicked an ear at the sound of Jack's voice and gave a small, rumbling huff, half grunt, half sigh. Jack almost smiled. Almost. But as the heat deepened, something unexpected happened. The shepherd stood up, testing his injured leg carefully. Then, without so much as a backward glance, he began walking toward the tree line again. Jack cursed softly under his breath and followed, partly out of exasperation, partly because some invisible thread tugged him forward. They didn't go far, only to a ridge about 50 yards from the camp. From there, the forest opened into a small clearing, and the dog stopped. His whole posture shifted, head high, tail stiff, ears pricked toward the north. It was the stance of a soldier who'd spotted a target. Jack felt his pulse quicken before he even understood why. The wind shifted, carrying a scent Jack couldn't place, but Ranger's reaction was immediate. His nose lifted, his chest expanded with a sharp inhale, and a low sound, a sound that wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a whine, rose from his throat. He wasn't afraid. He was focused. Jack scanned the tree line but saw nothing except heat haze and pine shadows. Still, the sense of being pulled toward something settled deep in his chest. He'd planned to hike alone for 3 days, to keep the world at a distance. But now the forest no longer felt like a backdrop. It felt alive, aware, and waiting. He crouched next to the dog, their shoulders almost level. "What the hell are you trying to tell me?" he whispered. Ranger didn't turn to him. He didn't need to. Everything in his posture screamed the same thing. "Follow me." Jack looked out into the forest, into the endless green darkness between the trees. He could turn back now, patch the dog up, head down the trail, forget the faint sounds he'd heard. He'd spent years trying to stay away from trouble, convincing himself he'd earned that right. But the air was different now. Heavy, charged. He reached out and laid a hand on Ranger's head. The fur was warm beneath his palm, the skull solid. There was trust there already, fragile but real. Jack hadn't asked for it, but he couldn't ignore it either. "All right," he said quietly, his voice steady, the same way it used to be when he'd brief his men before heading out on missions. "Show me." The dog's ears twitched once. Then he stepped forward, melting into the line of trees like he'd always belonged there. Jack followed, his boots crunching softly over pine needles, and the forest swallowed them both whole. Jack Turner tightened the strap on his backpack as Ranger moved ahead of him, slipping between the thick pines like a shadow that knew its way home. The morning heat was beginning to build, not yet unbearable, but sticky enough that every breath carried the scent of resin and sun-warmed bark. The air was alive with insects, mosquitoes swarming lazily, cicadas droning somewhere high above. Jack could hear the forest breathing. Ranger's pace wasn't random. The German shepherd, still limping slightly on his bandaged leg, trotted with purpose. His ears were high, swiveling toward faint sounds in the distance, nose twitching to catch traces of something that Jack couldn't perceive. This wasn't an injured dog wandering blindly. This was a soldier on a mission. Jack followed with the wary steps of a man who didn't like being led, but didn't have a better idea. A part of him was already regretting this. He'd come here to get away from humanity, not chase some ghost in the woods. Yet something in the way, Ranger glanced back from time to time, checking to make sure Jack was still with him, made it impossible to turn back. At a bend in the trail, Ranger stopped abruptly. The forest ahead thickened into a wall of underbrush and ferns, the sunlight struggling to pierce through the dense canopy. Jack squinted. The faint dirt trail they'd been following seemed to fade into nothingness here. "This is where you want to go?" he muttered, stepping closer. Ranger lowered his head, sniffed at the ground, and let out a low, steady bark, a sound that was neither warning nor fear. It was a call. Jack pushed through the ferns. The air changed almost immediately. It grew cooler beneath the heavy canopy, damp and earthy. Somewhere, water trickled faintly, like a whisper beneath the soil. Ranger's ears flicked toward the sound. They moved carefully, Jack scanning the shadows the way he once scanned alleyways in Kabul. His hand brushed unconsciously against the small folding knife clipped to his belt. It wasn't much, but old habits died hard. A sudden flutter overhead startled him. A large black raven burst out of the branches, cawing harshly as it took off toward the north. Ranger froze, watching the bird vanish between the trees. Jack frowned. Ravens were common, but their flight direction matched the dog's focus too perfectly to ignore. "You're serious about this, huh?" Jack said under his breath. Ranger simply stared ahead. The climb grew steeper as they moved deeper into the forest. Roots snaked across the path, gripping Jack's boots like fingers. At one point, he slipped on loose gravel and caught himself against a moss-covered boulder, cursing softly. Ranger paused, turned back, and gave him a brief look. Not worried, not impatient, just waiting. Jack huffed. Yeah, lead on, General." They reached a shallow stream, cutting across the hillside, a strip of cold, clear water over smooth stones. Ranger stepped into it, without hesitation, drinking deeply. Jack knelt, splashed his face, and let the cool water soak into his bandana. It helped, but only a little. The forest here felt different, not unfriendly, but heavier, like something was watching. He straightened slowly, scanning the tree line. That's when he saw it. A scrap of faded red fabric snagged on a low branch, fluttering faintly in the warm breeze. It wasn't new, but it hadn't been here long either. Jack plucked it free. The edges were frayed, a smear of something dark near the hem, old blood, dried into a rusty patch. He felt his pulse climb. Ranger was already ahead, nose pressed to the ground, following a scent Jack couldn't smell. "All right," Jack murmured. "Someone's been here." The forest thinned briefly, opening into a small clearing. It wasn't natural. Logs had been cut long ago, leaving gray stumps like gravestones around the space. At the center stood a wooden sign, its paint long peeled, but faint letters still visible. Harris Boundary. Private land. Jack frowned. Harris. He didn't know the name, but something about the way Ranger stiffened made the air tighten in his chest. The shepherd's tail lowered, not in fear, but in sharpened focus. The dog sniffed along the perimeter of the clearing, then angled north. Jack followed, stepping over fallen logs and crunching dry pine cones beneath his boots. A few minutes later, they came upon an old wire fence, half collapsed beneath the weight of years and vines. Ranger squeezed through a gap effortlessly. Jack ducked under the sagging wire, his shirt catching on a rusty barb. He yanked free, muttering a curse. Ahead, the trail was less trail and more instinct. Faint prints in the dirt, snapped branches, grass pressed down in narrow lines. Someone had passed through here on foot, someone human. Ranger slowed suddenly. His body language changed. Ears pinned slightly back, head low, every muscle coiled. Jack recognized the posture immediately. It was the stance of a dog catching something close. He crouched slightly, eyes narrowing. That's when he heard it, faint, rhythmic, like something tapping against wood. Talk, talk, talk. Then silence. Then again. Talk, talk. The sound came from somewhere just beyond a rise in the hill. Jack's heart ticked up a beat. He moved slower now, each step deliberate. Ranger crept ahead, quiet as breath, until they reached the crest. What lay beyond wasn't terrifying, not yet, but it was wrong. Below them, half hidden in a dip between the hills, stood an abandoned ranger station. At least, it looked abandoned. Peeling paint, one window boarded, the roof slouched slightly, like it was tired of standing. But smoke rose from the old metal chimney, a thin, pale thread against the green of the forest. Jack felt the back of his neck tighten. He didn't like surprises. Ranger's eyes were fixed on the building. His body trembled, not in fear, but in something sharper. Recognition. Jack scanned the ground around them. Someone had been moving in and out of this place. The faint boot prints, 2 sets, maybe 3, were still visible in the soft dirt. Not fresh, but recent enough to make him uneasy. He lowered himself slightly behind a boulder. Ranger pressed at his side. He thought about turning back. This wasn't his business. He could grab the dog, get back to camp, and pretend he'd never seen smoke curling from that forgotten chimney. But the image of the red cloth flashed again in his mind, and beneath that, something deeper. The look in Ranger's eyes when Jack first found him. Waiting. Trusting. Jack exhaled slowly through his nose. "You're dragging me into something, aren't you?" Ranger didn't blink. Down below, something moved behind the station's grimy window, a shadow flickering past. Jack's pulse thudded like distant artillery. He wasn't ready to storm any buildings, not again. But if someone was hurt or trapped. Ranger's low growl vibrated against the ground. The dog's tail stiffened like a rod. Jack put a steady hand on his neck to keep him quiet. They would need to approach carefully. He glanced toward the tree line opposite the station and saw a second figure, blurry through the heat shimmer. A man, or at least a shape of one, moving slowly along the fence near the back of the building. Jack's breath went tight. This was no abandoned structure. Someone was here. Whoever they weren't expecting company. Jack and Ranger slipped down the hill like ghosts, step by step, the dry pine needles barely rustling beneath their boots and paws. When they reached the edge of the clearing, Jack pressed his back against a tree trunk, listening. Talk, talk, talk. That tapping again, closer now. It was coming from the porch of the station. Maybe someone inside, maybe a warning. Ranger looked up at him, amber eyes catching a sliver of sunlight through the trees. Jack tightened his grip on the knife at his belt. This was no longer a quiet hike. It was the beginning of something else. The air around the abandoned ranger station felt unnaturally still, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Jack Turner crouched low in the undergrowth, one hand resting lightly on Ranger's back. The dog's muscles were coiled like a spring. Ears pricked forward, amber eyes locked on the shadow, moving near the building. The thin trail of smoke twisting from the chimney above didn't belong to a ruin. Someone lived here, or hid here. Jack scanned the perimeter. The back side of the building was partially collapsed, vines climbing the old wooden siding like fingers trying to drag it down. The porch creaked faintly under shifting weight. Somewhere beyond the far wall came the soft, irregular tapping he'd heard earlier. Talk, 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 steady enough to be deliberate. Ranger's low growl vibrated against Jack's palm. A rustle of leaves to the left made Jack freeze. A figure stepped out from the tree line, tall and wiry, carrying a shotgun casually, but not carelessly. He wore a faded green flannel shirt rolled up at the elbows, ripped jeans streaked with mud, and scuffed work boots. His hair was straw blonde, sticking out from beneath a worn baseball cap. A week's worth of uneven beard covered a narrow jawline. His pale blue eyes moved restlessly, always checking the shadows as if expecting something to jump out. He was in his early 30s, but there was a jitter in his movements that made him seem both older and younger at once, someone used to being on edge. Jack didn't move. Ranger didn't either. The man, Travis Harris, as Jack would learn later, walked up the porch, banged the shotgun lightly against the post, then disappeared inside through a crooked doorway. Jack's pulse slowed into something cold and familiar. It wasn't combat, not yet, but his body was remembering. He had seen men like Travis before, nervous, dangerous, the kind who didn't just live in the woods for peace. Ranger shifted his weight, clearly wanting to move closer. Jack leaned down and whispered into the dog's ear, "Easy. We wait." Minutes stretched. A bird somewhere above broke the silence with a single call, then fell quiet again. Jack studied the house carefully. There was only one main door and two windows visible from this angle, both smeared with grime and shadow. Through the left window, he caught a glimpse of movement inside. Not Travis, someone else. He slid around the tree line, keeping low. Ranger followed, moving silently despite his injury. Years of discipline showed in every cautious step. Jack found a small gap between the boards on the back wall. Peering through, he saw a room that might once have been a ranger's office. The furniture was broken, old maps peeling off the walls. A small wood-burning stove glowed faintly, feeding that thin smoke trail. In the center of the room sat a frail figure on a narrow cot, wrists loosely bound with rope. The woman was old, mid-70s, maybe older. Her body was slight and angular, like a tree branch left too long in the sun. Her hair, silver gray and tangled, framed a thin face with high cheekbones and faded blue eyes that were both exhausted and alert. Her pale skin was bruised at the wrists where the rope dug in. She wore a faded blue cotton blouse and black slacks, frayed at the knees. And despite the way her shoulders drooped, there was a stubbornness in the set of her jaw, a quiet strength in the way she sat upright. Ranger's nose twitched, and a low, nearly inaudible whine slipped out. The woman raised her head slightly at the sound. For a fraction of a second, her expression flickered, hope, disbelief, then fear again. Jack exhaled slowly through his nose. He'd stumbled into something that wasn't just a bad situation. It was wrong. Deeply wrong. The sound of boots creaking on old floorboards made him duck lower. Travis was pacing, talking to himself in low, ragged tones. Jack couldn't make out every word, but phrases slipped through the cracks in the wall like poison. She'll talk. She'll give it up. She has to. A plan began to take shape in Jack's head. Not clear, but enough to keep moving. Getting the woman out would require a distraction, and it would have to be fast. He glanced at Ranger, who was staring at him with the intensity of a trained soldier awaiting orders. "Not yet," Jack whispered. They shifted to the far side of the building. The back window was nailed shut, but the wood around it was soft with rot. Jack pressed his fingers to the edge, testing it. It creaked quietly under pressure. Not ideal, but workable. Then a voice cut through the stillness, making the air go taut. "Who's out there?" Travis's voice was sharp, almost feral. The shotgun clicked as he racked it. Jack went still, Ranger's ears flattened against his head, but he didn't growl. Travis stepped onto the porch again, shotgun at his hip, eyes scanning the tree line. For a tense heartbeat, Jack thought the man might walk straight toward them. But a twig snapped somewhere deeper in the forest. A deer, maybe, and Travis spun toward the noise, barking curses under his breath. Jack seized the opening. He crouched low, moved fast, and pried at the window. The rotted frame gave way with a soft groan, just enough to make a narrow opening. Ranger slipped through first, silent as smoke. Jack followed, landing lightly on the dusty wooden floor inside what had once been a storage room. The interior smelled of damp wood and old ash. The air was thick and stale. Through a cracked door ahead, he could see the woman on the cot again. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze was steady, locked on the direction Travis had gone. Jack approached quietly, Ranger close on his heels. "Ma'am," he whispered. She jumped at the sound, eyes widening. He lifted a hand, palm open. "I'm here to help. Quiet now." Her voice was hoarse, rasping through a throat gone dry. "You're not with him?" Jack shook his head once. "No." Tears gathered in the corners of her eyes, but didn't fall. She nodded, jaw tightening. This woman wasn't just scared. She was someone who'd been holding on far too long. Jack pulled his pocket knife from his belt and sliced through the ropes at her wrists. Her skin was ice cold beneath his fingers. He noticed the faint tattoo on her inner forearm. Faded letters, likely military or a family mark. A detail, but it told him something. She wasn't a stranger to hard times. Footsteps thudded on the porch again. Travis was back. Jack's pulse quickened, but his movements stayed calm. "Can you walk?" he whispered. She nodded weakly. "Good. We leave now." Ranger positioned himself between them and the door like a silent guardian. Jack helped the woman, Evelyn Harris, to her feet. She was light as a bird, her shoulder bones sharp beneath the thin fabric of her blouse. But her spine was straight, and when she leaned on Jack's arm, it wasn't in surrender. It was in trust. The door to the main room creaked. Travis muttered something about hearing a damn dog. Jack guided Evelyn through the storage room toward the broken window. Then from outside, a twig snapped again. Louder this time. Travis spun around. "Who's there?" Jack didn't wait. He boosted Evelyn out through the window as Ranger bounded ahead, landing softly in the ferns. Jack followed, rolling to his feet and gripping her elbow to steady her. Behind them, Travis's voice cracked through the clearing. "I'll kill you if you run." Jack's jaw clenched. "Not today," he muttered. Ranger barked once, a sharp, defiant sound that cut through the still forest like a flare. Then they ran. Branches whipped against Jack Turner's arms as he pushed forward through the forest, guiding Evelyn Harris with one hand while the other gripped his pack. Ranger ran ahead, his black and tan form cutting through the trees like a moving shadow. His ears were pinned back, nose forward, navigating the maze of pines with effortless precision. Behind them, Travis Harris's voice echoed, sharp and ragged. "You won't get far." The sound of him crashing through the undergrowth followed close behind. Jack's breathing grew heavier, not from panic, but from calculation. The ground was uneven, roots and rocks hidden beneath summer brush. He'd done this before, in mountains far from here, under worse pressure. But this time wasn't a war zone. This time, an elderly woman clung to his arm like a lifeline. Evelyn stumbled on a hidden root, and Jack caught her with a swift movement, steadying her. Up close, Her thin frame trembled, but her eyes, those faded blue eyes, still burned with stubborn light. "I can run," she whispered hoarsely, breath scraping the back of her throat. "Not fast," Jack muttered back, "but fast enough." He scanned the area and found a faint game trail weaving downhill through denser pines. It offered more cover. Ranger was already on it, waiting for the signal. Jack tightened his grip on Evelyn's elbow, guiding her forward. The forest swallowed their sound, but Travis's pursuit grew louder. They followed the narrow trail down a slope slick with dry pine needles. Jack placed each boot carefully, helping Evelyn keep her footing. He'd seen old people break bones too easily. She wasn't fragile in spirit, but her body couldn't match Ranger's pace. A loud crack echoed through the trees. Travis had fired the shotgun. Bark exploded from a tree trunk to their right. Ranger whipped his head back, ears sharp. Jack didn't break stride. "Keep going," he hissed. After a tense few minutes, the slope leveled into a wide, shaded hollow, a place where sunlight trickled through the canopy in long, broken shafts. A creek ran through the center, its shallow water glittering like silver wire. Jack guided Evelyn across, water splashing around their ankles. Ranger paused midstream, nose up, listening. Jack knew that stance too well. Something ahead. On the opposite bank stood a figure. The man was older, in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, with the solid frame of someone who'd spent a lifetime outdoors. His uniform shirt was tan, with a gold star pinned to the chest, tucked neatly into dark cargo pants. His salt and pepper hair was cropped short, his clean-shaven face weathered but alert. Brown eyes, sharp but calm, assessed the scene like a man trained to read danger in seconds. One hand rested on the holster at his hip. "Sheriff Collins," Evelyn rasped, breath catching in her throat. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Evelyn?" Jack didn't lower his guard. He didn't know this man, but the way Evelyn's trembling hand reached forward told him she did. Collins moved quickly, crossing the creek with long strides. "I've been looking for you for weeks," he said, his voice low and firm. His gaze flicked to Jack, narrowing slightly, not in hostility, but in rapid calculation. "Who are you?" "Jack Turner," Jack answered, still holding Evelyn steady. "She was tied up in that ranger station. Guy with the shotgun's on our tail." Ranger growled low, head turned toward the slope behind them. Collins didn't hesitate. His hand went to his radio, clipped to his belt. "Collins to dispatch. I've got Evelyn Harris alive. Repeat, alive. Send backup to Sector North 7. Armed suspect in pursuit." The radio crackled in reply. "Copy that, Collins. Units en route." Evelyn sagged against Jack's side, her breath trembling, but her eyes flicked toward the trees. "He won't stop," she whispered. "He wants the deed. He thinks I have it." Jack didn't fully understand, but he recognized desperation when he heard it. Collins adjusted his grip on his sidearm. "We're moving. Fast." They set off down the creek, moving with the water as cover. Ranger ranged ahead, his body a fluid line of alert motion. Jack walked slightly behind Evelyn, scanning the forest for movement. Years of combat had taught him to hear before seeing. The crunch of leaves, the uneven rhythm of someone running too fast. Travis wasn't far behind. About 200 yards downstream, the creek opened into a small clearing surrounded by pines. Collins slowed, raised a hand, and listened. A distant branch snapped. Travis was closing in. Then a second sound broke the tension. Engines. Faint but steady, somewhere downhill. Sirens followed, short bursts, muted by the forest but growing clearer. Back up. Collins turned to Jack. We hold here. They'll reach us in 3 minutes. Jack nodded. Ranger moved to the edge of the clearing, facing the direction they'd come, ears sharp and tail rigid. Jack could feel the shift in the air. The forest had that pre-storm weight again. Travis emerged from the trees a minute later, disheveled, breathing hard. His shotgun hung low, but ready. His blonde hair stuck to his forehead with sweat, his pale blue eyes wild. "Give her to me," he spat. "She's mine to deal with." Collins raised his weapon, stance steady. "Put it down, Travis." "Don't you talk to me like that," Travis snapped, his voice cracking on the edges of panic. "This is family business." Jack stepped slightly forward, angling his body between Travis and Evelyn. His stance was calm, but coiled. Travis noticed. "Who the hell are you?" "Wrong guy to point a gun at," Jack said evenly. For a moment, everything froze. The sound of cicadas, the rushing creek, the distant wail of sirens. Then Travis shifted, finger tightening on the trigger. Ranger moved first. The dog lunged forward with explosive power, a blur of black and tan streaking across the clearing. Jack shouted, "Down!" Evelyn ducked behind a fallen log. Collins stepped to the side, weapon raised, but Ranger had already closed the distance. Travis jerked the shotgun upward too late. Ranger's teeth clamped onto his wrist, the weapon clattering to the ground. The man screamed, stumbling backward, striking the trunk of a pine tree. Jack closed the gap in 3 strides, kicked the gun away, and twisted Travis's arm behind him in a practiced military movement. Collins moved in with trained efficiency, cuffing Travis's hands behind his back. "Travis Harris," he said, his voice iron calm. "You're under arrest for kidnapping, unlawful confinement, and assault with a deadly weapon." Travis struggled weakly, fury twisting his narrow jawline, but he didn't break free. He glared at Evelyn. "You can't keep it from me forever," he hissed. Evelyn's chin lifted. For the first time since Jack had met her, she stood straight, not frail, not broken. "Watch me," she said softly. Sirens filled the clearing as 2 deputies arrived, their tan uniforms flashing through the trees. One helped Evelyn into a waiting ATV, while the other took custody of Travis. Collins gave Jack a long, measuring look. "You're not from around here." "No," Jack said simply. "You saved her," Collins replied. "That counts for a lot out here." Jack didn't answer. Ranger padded up beside him, tongue lolling, amber eyes still alert. Jack placed a hand on the dog's head. He did most of the saving. As the deputies led Travis away, Evelyn looked back at Jack. She didn't speak, but her eyes, clear, blue, and fierce, said enough. The forest was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This was the sound of something ending, and something else beginning. The forest had changed. The frantic crackle of gunfire and shouting had faded into a soft chorus of summer night sounds. The quiet whisper of wind sliding through the pine branches, the gentle lap of the creek as it wound its way between rocks, the rhythmic clicks of insects waking after the storm. It wasn't truly night yet, just the fragile hour between daylight and darkness, when the world holds its breath. Jack Turner stood in the clearing with his boots sunk half an inch into the soft soil, watching the patrol lights wash the forest in blue and red. Ranger sat at his left side, panting lightly. His ears were perked, but his posture had loosened, still alert, but not ready to spring anymore. The adrenaline had burned off slowly, leaving behind the stillness that follows a fight well fought. The German shepherd tilted his head toward the sound of distant radio chatter. Jack reached down, absently resting a hand on his thick fur. It wasn't a gesture of reward. It was quiet acknowledgement. A few yards away, deputies moved with steady, practiced rhythm. One was photographing the shotgun Travis had dropped in the dirt. Another was bagging spent shells. A third was calling in updates over a crackling radio. The chaos of the last hour had turned into procedure, a routine Jack recognized too well. He'd seen the same kind of controlled aftermath in dusty villages far from here, except this time the war was small, local, personal. Evelyn Harris sat on the open tailgate of a patrol truck, wrapped in a thick wool blanket. It was too big for her small frame, and it made her look even more fragile than she already was. Her silver hair was tangled and streaked with dirt, her hands trembling slightly as they clutched the edges of the fabric. Yet her eyes, the same soft blue Jack had seen glimmering weakly in that dark ranger station, were different now. No longer dull with fear. They burned softly, like embers refusing to die out. Sheriff Collins stood next to her, one boot on the bumper, his tan uniform smeared with streaks of mud. His posture was both authoritative and careful, the way a man stands when trying not to break something delicate. He spoke to her in a calm, steady voice that cut through the hum of radios and engines. Jack couldn't hear every word, but he caught pieces. Safe now. Hospital. Travis in custody. Evelyn nodded slowly, her frail fingers flexing against the wool. Travis Harris sat handcuffed in the back of a patrol SUV. His blonde hair clung to his forehead, streaked with sweat and blood where Ranger's teeth had torn the skin. His pale blue eyes darted left and right, wild earlier, but now hollow. Rage had bled into something smaller, the dull, shuddering quiet of a man who'd realized his plan was already crumbling beneath him. One of the deputies slammed the door shut, and the sound echoed through the trees. Sheriff Collins approached Jack. His face was lined, tired, but his voice was steady. "You did good out there, Turner." Jack shook his head slightly, glancing at Ranger. "He did the hard part. I just kept up." Collins huffed out a quiet laugh, short and low. "Then I guess I owe the both of you. She'd be dead if no one had found her." Jack didn't respond. He wasn't good at accepting gratitude. In his world, helping people had rarely earned anyone a medal. An ambulance had pulled up some time ago, its headlights cutting white into the gathering dusk. Two EMTs moved around Evelyn with the smooth precision of people who had done this 100 times before. They checked her pulse, wrapped her in clean gauze where her wrists were raw from the ropes, and helped her onto a stretcher. She didn't resist, though she glanced nervously toward the tree line as if expecting Travis to emerge again. Ranger rose as she was lifted. He took 2 quiet steps forward, tail low, but wagging softly. Evelyn looked down at him from the stretcher, and for the first time since Jack had met her, her face shifted into something warm. Her lips trembled, but the smile that spread there was gentle and unshaken. She stretched a thin hand toward him. "Good boy," she whispered. Ranger leaned his head closer, accepting the touch like it was something sacred. Jack stood a few feet behind, arms crossed loosely over his chest. The night air smelled of damp soil and pine sap, and beneath that, something subtle. Relief. As the EMTs loaded Evelyn into the ambulance, Collins stood beside Jack. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the stretcher locking into place echoed softly. "She's tough," Collins said eventually. "I've known her since I was a rookie. Always figured she'd outlive all of us. Guess I wasn't wrong. Jack nodded once. You giving a statement at the station? Collins asked. Yeah, Jack replied. Then I'll figure out the rest. The sheriff tilted his head slightly. You don't strike me as the type who figures out much of anything ahead of time. Jack cracked half a smile. That obvious? The sheriff clapped a hand on his shoulder. Not too hard. Just enough to carry weight. This town doesn't forget when someone steps up. Remember that. As the last patrol car rolled out, the flashing lights grew distant until they were swallowed by the dark tree line. The forest began to sound like itself again. Frogs near the creek, wind brushing through branches, the soft pad of Ranger's paws on pine needles. Jack stood there a while longer, alone, but not alone. He hadn't planned to stay, but something about the way Evelyn looked at Ranger, the way the forest breathed again after holding so much pain, made him think that maybe, for the first time in years, he didn't need to run. The small hospital in Bozeman was quiet in the late morning light. The mountains framed the horizon beyond its windows, their peaks dusted faintly with snow, even in summer. Jack Turner sat in the waiting area, one foot stretched out, fingers tapping unconsciously against his thigh. He hated hospitals. They were too clean, too still, too much like the holding rooms of military bases where bad news lived in white walls. Beside him, Ranger lay stretched across the floor, head resting on his paws, chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. Every now and then, someone walked past. Nurses, orderlies, a mother with a toddler, and their eyes softened at the sight of the German shepherd. A few even reached out to scratch his ears. Ranger accepted the attention with calm dignity. Sheriff Collins appeared at the end of the hallway, still in uniform, but with his hat tucked under one arm. The exhaustion in his face had faded slightly, replaced by the steady calm of a man whose job for once had ended well. She's ready to see you, he said. Jack stood, Ranger rising beside him in one smooth motion. They walked together down the polished hallway toward room 214. Sunlight poured in through the blinds, casting thin white stripes across the floor. Evelyn Harris was sitting up in bed when they entered. Her thin frame was propped by pillows, the white of her hospital gown glowing softly in the light. Her silver hair had been brushed, falling around her face like soft feathers. Her wrists were wrapped in clean gauze, but the color had returned to her cheeks. When she saw Ranger, her expression changed instantly, something bright and tender unfurling in her tired eyes. Well, she rasped softly, look who came back. Ranger padded to the side of the bed, tail thumping gently against the wall. She reached down to touch his head, her fingers trembling only slightly now. You're a good boy, she whispered, as if it were a prayer. Jack stood at the foot of the bed, hands in his jacket pockets. He's the one who found you, he said. Evelyn smiled faintly, but her eyes were steady. And you didn't walk away. That counts for more than you know. Before Jack could answer, Collins stepped forward. Travis is in custody, he said, voice calm but firm. He confessed to everything. DA's already preparing charges. He's not getting out anytime soon. Evelyn exhaled slowly, the sound shaky but steady. Good. The property's being secured, Collins continued. You'll have time to rebuild. No one's taking your home away. Her gaze drifted toward the window, where summer sunlight spread across the hills. My father built that house with his own hands, she murmured. It's not just land. It's everything we ever were. He always said, the trees remember. Jack felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't know this woman beyond the last few days, but her quiet defiance rang like something familiar. The kind of strength that didn't come from muscles or weapons. Collins glanced at Jack, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. She's got plans. You sticking around? Jack looked down at Ranger. The dog had settled near Evelyn's feet, head resting lightly against the edge of her blanket, eyes half-lidded in a way Jack had learned meant trust. Jack had planned to keep walking after this, find another trail, another forest, another nowhere to disappear into. But standing here, listening to the sound of Evelyn's voice, watching Ranger find a place he clearly liked, it didn't feel so simple anymore. Maybe, Jack said finally. For a while. Evelyn laughed softly, the sound fragile but bright. Good. Someone's got to make sure I don't burn that old house down trying to fix it myself. For a long time, they just sat in the quiet, letting the world outside exist without them. No sirens, no shouts, just sunlight and breathing. Later, as Jack stepped outside the hospital, the air smelled like warm pine and dry earth. The sky was impossibly blue, the kind of blue he hadn't noticed in years. Ranger trotted beside him, his steps light, ears perked, tail swaying lazily. Jack paused at the edge of the parking lot, staring out toward the distant tree line. Pine Hollow Forest was still out there. It wasn't just a place where something terrible happened anymore. It was where something changed. Ranger nudged his leg with his nose. Jack scratched behind his ears. Yeah, he said softly. We'll stick around a little longer. The breeze carried the scent of summer through the parking lot. For the first time in a long time, Jack Turner wasn't running. He was standing still. When Jack Turner stepped into Pine Hollow Forest that summer morning, he was a man searching for silence, not hope. He carried the weight of war on his shoulders, the kind that doesn't always show in scars, but in the way someone looks at the world. Ranger was his only constant, his anchor in a quiet life he didn't think could change. But somewhere beneath those towering pines, God had written a different story. It wasn't about battles. It was about people finding their way back to one another. Evelyn Harris, a woman who had spent her last strength holding on to a place she loved, was saved not by luck, but by the bond of loyalty between a man and his dog. In the small spaces between fear and courage, grace made its home. A sheriff who didn't give up, a soldier who decided to stop running, and a dog whose instinct refused to let evil win. These simple pieces came together like threads in a larger plan. Some call it fate. Others call it miracle. In the stillness after the storm, the forest didn't feel broken. It felt redeemed. Jack wasn't just a man alone in the woods anymore. He was part of something bigger, a community that still believed in kindness, in courage, and in second chances. And maybe that's where God works best. Not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments when ordinary people choose to do something good. If you believe small acts can create big miracles, then carry that light with you. Be the hand that reaches out. Be the voice that stands for someone who can't. May God bless you and your loved ones with courage, peace, and compassion. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe to this channel to help spread stories of love, faith, and second chances. Because sometimes, miracles begin with a single faithful step.